Thank you for tuning into our podcast hosted by the Moving Water Alliance. I'm Parth Gupta. I'm an environmentalist with the Planet Calls. Stay tuned and do not forget to share and subscribe to our podcast. Today, we'll be discussing how you can reduce your plastic usage in your day-to-day life. And with us, we have Jennifer Damian. Jennifer is a professional classical musician, educator, autism specialist, disabilities advocate, and biomedical mentor in Los Angeles. Welcome to our show, Jennifer. We're thrilled you could join us.
Thank you, Parth, for that lovely introduction. I'm so glad to be here on your podcast today.
We're glad too. In a study published in Science Advances, researchers found that residents of the US and the UK produce more plastic waste per person than any other nation. Americans generate an average of 105 kilograms of plastic per year, and the British are close behind, throwing away almost 99 kilograms annually. And just to put that into perspective for our listeners here, a household with 4 people is producing 400 kilograms of plastic waste a year. And think about it, because plastic doesn't decompose, each bag, each wrapper, covering that we've thrown away is still lying somewhere in some landfill. And I think the saddest part of these numbers is that an estimate said that plastic production on average doubles every 11 years. The problem being that we are well on our way to doubling plastic production, very, very ahead of that. So that's 300 million tons of plastics annually. And I think most of us know in our heart that plastic is bad, whether we talk about it from an environmental point of view or from a health perspective. But what I think is that it's just difficult for most people to separate life from plastic. And this is where, I like your perspective here, Jenny. So does the constant use of plastic in our home and community have a negative impact on our personal and communal lives?
The short answer is yes. It does have a negative impact on everything from our home to our environment. And we see plastic use in every industry that we have here, from our food industry, our medical industry, and down to the products that we consume in our homes. We have use of plastic in schools and work. And the reason why is that plastic, having been developed over time, it has created ease. Now, though it creates ease and though it is necessary in, for instance, the medical industries because of contaminants and the inability to reuse medical industry plastic, we have also seen that there is a negative effect that ultimately leads plastics back into the sources that we need to consume food, and in the animals that if you eat animals, it ends up inside of animals either as a chemical contaminant or toxic contaminant or as microplastics. So landing in the animals and in the sea life especially, that's important to understand that that's one way that plastic has negatively impacted that part of our life. But it also ends up back into landfills and as floating rubbish in the world, the things that don't end up where it can be recycled and reused. So what I really want to touch on is that plastic can be recycled, but not all of it can. It's stained, it's mixed plastics that aren't available for that recycling program. And a lot of people just give up, or they toss things out their windows, or things blow away and aren't picked up, like wrappers, plastic wrappers, or one-use bottles, or even other pieces of plastic that come from other products we use. And that completely contaminates any groundwater near a landfill. And it also contaminates the rivers, the lakes, and the oceans. So because we know that recycling is going to help, but it can't always be completely utilized. And we have to really understand that everything that's living around us is going to either consume products that have been chemically or toxically affected, or we're going to be breathing any off gases that come from plastics, or we're going to be surrounded by rubbish that affects our emotional and mental health and also the awareness. It's creating a negative awareness for people. And it's just by that sight of plastic. Why should we do anything? We should just give up. That's one idea. Luckily, there are more people out there that are starting to become very aware that they can do something because of these effects on every aspect of our lives daily with plastic.
Yeah. While you were talking about, this just rubbish literally being around, I think it's been getting a lot of attention recently, what they call the Great Pacific Rubbish Patch. It's pretty much just plastic floating around in the Pacific Ocean, and it's the size of Texas. I mean, I shudder to think, literally we've trashed the entire ocean. It's huge, right? And it's really sad. So I can sort of begin to understand, but
that's a very good visual. That's a huge visual for people to understand that there is that island where it's multiple islands at this time in the Pacific Ocean. That is in part, it's 100% our fault. We contributed to that. Those plastics that are building up, what we see on the top, you've got to see the pictures of what's on the bottom. It goes for miles.
And, in your personal experience, right? And, as we introduce you to our listeners, you had a lot of it. What are some of the things you found out, right? You had a lot of interest in this area of how plastics have impacted human life. And I know, for example, there have been some advances which were made in terms of components within plastic which are bad, right? So we'd like to know more about that.
The use of plastic, it's continuing. It won't stop completely because we have to use these plastics in the medical industry, for instance. In our daily lives, that use has contributed to a couple of things that led me to moving away from plastic, and one of which is the effect on the autoimmune and endocrine systems in humans. Mm-hmm. And my journey into this is because of my own family and also my son, who have autoimmune dysfunction and endocrinological issues, that when he was tested as a baby and as a toddler, we found that he was poisoned by BPA, which is a toxin found in certain types of plastics. What we also discovered is that the plastics have been used for decades. So a lot of the BPA and other toxins had leached into our bodies. And while you're pregnant, anything that's in your body goes into the baby. And it sets up a scenario where if you have these toxins infiltrate the body from your own plastic use, then, and also from drinking water that's contaminated by digoxin, the different critical areas of development in utero are affected. That means brain development and immune system development. And so what we have here is a scenario where babies are already born more vulnerable to toxins because they've been exposed to it in utero, particularly if the mother or the environment in which the mother lives is very plastic driven, like California, for instance. So what I found with my son in learning this with the different geneticists and immunologists and the doctors is that we immediately needed to curtail plastic use in my home. That means, though he had been breastfeeding, for instance, we also used plastic bottles, baby bottles, when I wasn't there. And the issue is that those plastic baby bottles, where babies who are vulnerable consume their formula or their breast milk, it's poisoned by BPA. And the studies proved it. Doctors started suggesting go back to glass or go to non-BPA plastic. And what they did is nationally in the US, from these studies and from the different results of looking at children with early onset autoimmune disorders, is that they pushed for new laws and codes to stop BPA use in products that would have food inside of them, like tin cans that we have for vegetables and the other food stuff. A lot of the tin cans needed to have no BPA lining. So you'll actually see it on the cans where it says not lined with BPA if you look at the labels. And then with baby bottles, there are baby bottles used still. And in those cartons that contain it, it says not BPA or BPA free. So we moved from seeing the insults to children and babies who had early onset autoimmune and endocrinological disease to creating awareness in the people that this was happening, to creating laws and enforcing codes to stop using this in products, to now it's accepted. No one uses BPA for baby bottles. So that early experience I had as a young mom, it led me to this. And I'll tell you, it was not an easy thing to move from plastic initially to non-plastic because of the ease. So what my home looks like now, it's plastic free. I mean, I might have a few things here and there because they do come in that way, but I try not to. So just 3 things I did. I moved away from anything plastic that contained foods or liquids to mason jars and glass and ceramics and cooked in stainless steel. And the other thing I did too is I taught my son very early on by example and also talking about it with his friends and the other moms. Let's bring double-walled steel tumblers to the cafe. So instead of giving us these one-use plastic cups that had Americanos, we brought our stainless steel tumblers and said, would you fill this? And they were happy. And they even discounted us. So that's an incentive that's not being promoted as much, should be. And we are helping us. We're helping the environment. We're helping the water sources. We're helping create awareness by walking around with stainless steel tumblers that are creatively painted, and people catch on to those things. And, you know, the third thing that we've done too with plastics is we've also really lobbied for people to understand that children play with toys. So we want things that babies put in their mouths, like teethers or early childhood education toys, to be phthalate free, which is another toxin found in plastic. And look at this. Toys are phthalate free now. Phthalate makes plastic soft and malleable so babies can chew on it. There are different things they do now. They do not put phthalate because that too contributed to endocrine issues in children. So it was me becoming a mom that did this. It pushed me to understand all these things, plus it helped him become healthy again.
Yeah. So I don't know. I see a cycle here, right? Like oftentimes this kind of regulation, it's late to the game, right? A lot of the times the damage is done. I'm sure there are other chemicals which we'll find are present in plastics, which turned out to be bad. But thank you so much for sharing your tips. And I must congratulate you in a way, in fact, to have achieved this feat. Yeah, just for our listeners, I was curious, what do you have any ideas in terms of how further we can, reduce our plastic use and our exposure, right? I think we're all slaves to plastic.
Yeah, there's one way of looking at it, that we're slaves to plastic, but we're actually not. Maybe the medical industry, I keep presenting that because there is a reason why they have to use plastic in the medical industry. We've just grown as a population in different areas where medical needs are high. So we can't reuse glass the way we used to, glass pipettes for blood draws, et cetera, et cetera. It's not going to work in that capacity. But really, if we think about it, 100 years ago, we didn't have plastic to this extent. And people were using wood. They were using metal. They were using glass. They were creating stoneware. And we're now moving towards that again because of this awareness that plastic has a negative impact on our health and on our lives and on marine animals and land animals. So what we can do, and we all have this choice, is we can have control. So it starts with us individually. We have control with what we buy, what we consume, and thus make it simple to start, because what we're also doing is creating an awareness out there by what we consume and purchase. So for instance, I gave the example of a stainless steel double-walled container for coffee or for water. That's become quite trendy here in Los Angeles. It is something that mothers like to show off. Look at my pretty little bottle. It's got this on it. Okay, it's very trendy. And the children have the children-sized bottles that they can take for lunch and pack it for school. And what we see there is trend. Okay, it's what you see on television. It's what you see on social media. These things are important because what we've done is, as we've become a more evolved society, we've also come to rely more on fast fashion and the trends. So we can use this to our advantage. We can use social media and the trend system that's happening with fast fashion, create the awareness that we have a choice to increase our health, decrease plastic by buying one time only, or twice if you wanted to, a stainless steel double-walled tumbler to put your coffee in. Okay.
Yeah. I know now what I'm going to buy next, but yeah, thanks for the good idea there. And coming to good times ahead, we're heading into the holidays with Thanksgiving, Christmas coming up, and just like every year, we delve into capitalism. And I think I shared this with a lot of our listeners out there. I also have a bunch of shopping and gifts to do, honestly, especially because I really didn't do much of that last year. Right? But sadly, what I see every year, round robin, is the sheer wastage. I mean, my plastic use just shoots up, and sometimes it's the excessive wrapping, and sometimes it's just we're ending up buying things which I know are bad for the environment, right? So, talking about trends, are there some steps we can take? How do we focus on reduction of the plastics right now while also being, socially acceptable? How can I have the best gift or the set of gifts while hurting the earth as less as possible?
Oh, you have so many choices, Parth. One thing that we do in our home, for instance, is that we don't use wrapping paper that hasn't been reused. So there's a lot of water that's needed to use and plastics that are mixed together to create shiny, beautiful things. So if it's there already, we do use it. But for wrapping, we tend to use reusable paper bags that are pretty, of course, we decorate it. But also, choosing things where you can make an impact on someone else's life might be a way to do this. Here's an example. Last year, because I don't use plastic cling wrap at all, I haven't used it for probably 20 years. And what I do to cover foods, for instance, when I go to feasts and dinners where I have to cover things and bring it as a potluck, I will use my reusable beeswax linen. It's just linen. It's baked and created with beeswax and another wax. And you can purchase them now in many places online or at stores. And what you do is you cover these bowls and it's waterproof. It doesn't come off. Now, what I did as a mom is I bought a lot of those from a sustainable, environmentally sound company. And I gave them as presents to people that wanted them, of course, or the people who've never seen these before that were using plastic on a daily basis. And it inspired them to get another set. It also stopped them from using cling wrap, which they were consuming so much per year. And that then eliminated that one person's poundage of plastics. So that's one way. You can try to influence other people gently by buying them something for their birthday or for Christmas or Hanukkah. Okay. You can also, you're becoming trendy by doing this. Yeah. If you're amongst a group of parents or students and you get that first set of beeswax linen wrap, you're the coolest person on the block now. All right. You are now influencing. So you create that ripple effect. And then just think though, when you purchase these things, try to go as glass oriented or metal oriented as possible in little baby steps, and go for companies that actually have a very low carbon footprint. They do exist. You can also, in terms of washing in the home, this is what we do. We don't use jugs of detergent, haven't for a while. We use detergent sheets. It's just a film of soap, and that is it. You throw it in the laundry machine and it washes your clothes. And it's usually it always is in a cardboard box, a recycled cardboard container. But you now have eliminated the jugs that don't always get recycled. They can't. If there's any stain on a large detergent bottle that you buy to consume in your home, unless you wash it out really well, you can't recycle it. So you've got to go to the same effect, a product that does the same thing in your home, and go for containerless products like that. Or the plastic sheets that you use in your dryer. It's actually plastic, by the way. What you do is don't use that. Go for paper sheets that have the scent on it on a drying machine. Or you can do what I do, which is I use woolen balls, and I might put essential oils, like a drop or two on each, and throw it into the dryer. And these are things that are easy to do. Plus, you'll never have to buy a box of drying sheets again. You just have an essential oil or none, and you have 3 woolen balls, throw it in the dryer. It is good for years and years and years because wool does not disintegrate and, turn into, air. Okay. It's going to be there for quite a while. So these are things that we can do to reduce the plastic in our home as the consumer and as an influencer. This is what we want to do now. We want to influence our children. My son thinks this is normal. Like we've been doing it for decades. We haven't. My son has never grown up otherwise. He's always thought everything that I do in the home with him and with my, friends and family, that it's always been done. And that's the idea. We want children to learn that this is the way we can do things and live our lives. And the parents who are my age and older, we can influence them because they've grown up in plastic. So we're changing friends, then we're changing your local community, and then we're changing the society, then we're changing the world. Do you see? It's a ripple effect. Because at the end of the day, this is our problem. Life is like a train. So there is a head engine, which is you and me. We are the consumers. We purchase things. If you think about that analogy, there's a caboose end. That's the river cleanups. That's the water cleanups for the ocean. Now we can continually do that, clean up the waters, and it's a good thing. But we're going to add more work to them at the end if we don't, at the head engine, consume things that are plastic less as much as possible. So less plastic in the beginning equals less plastic at the end. We make the world a happier place.
I think what I like about this, the best is that these are sort of going hand in hand, right? I mean, steps taken to increase our health and get rid of this over dependence on plastics. They're so hand in hand. And I think both are what we need to save our planet. And also for the benefit of our listeners. For people looking for presents, don't forget to drop by The Planet Calls online store. We've been able to amass a set of items which we know are environment friendly. And by buying these, you're not only supporting our work, but also helping us spread the message. Another thing, coming back to our discussion about plastics, Jenny, is, and I know you touched upon this earlier, is that the one thing which, countries and communities, especially we've seen that coming from the UK, we've seen that across, is that recycling plastics is not going to be the solution to this problem, right? Most of the plastic that we think we recycled actually still ends up in landfills. And I think you talked about that detergent bottle, right? It's just a classic case. I mean, we think that we've tossed the bottle into the recycling bin. And yes, we've saved the planet. The sad reality is that that's not true. It's just not practical to have high recycling proportions. And there's 2 reasons, right? It's one, it's either too expensive, or the second part, which I think is more concerning, is that we are now discovering this problem of microplastics, right? And these are plastics that once we recycle them, they end up breaking into these microscopic pieces. And more as research is developing, we're realizing there's a lot of harmful effects that they have, not only on us, but, just across the environment. So the takeaway from this is that the long-term solution is not going to be recycling. We need to cut off excessive plastic use right up from the source. And another topic of high interest for us, here at the Moving Water Alliance is, and for our listeners, we do plan on covering this in much greater depth in the future. But I know, Jenny, that you're an avid beach cleanup and initiative driver yourself. So I wanted to get a piece of your mind on this. Are the beach cleanups and the river cleanups actually sustainable? I've been a part of a lot of them, and I often think about their sustainability. We organize a cleanup and we go back a month later, it feels like the beach is just back to where it was. So what's your perspective on this?
Oh, I know how you feel, Parth. I feel the same way sometimes when I do beach cleanups, and exactly. The next month it's all back. So you feel constantly downtrodden, thinking, did I make an impact? You have. The answer is yes, you have. I'm an organizer of beach cleanups too, and I've been doing river cleanups and beach cleanups and lake cleanups for decades. But I will say this, it's only partially sustainable. You cannot have beach cleanups only as a solution to the plastic problem that we have on this planet. So it is only going to work if we use the plastic cleanup to really work on the areas that have the pollution visibly. But as I said before, we need to reduce the amount of plastic we consume on our daily lives. We have to eliminate it as much as possible, because we're just creating more work for ourselves as the population grows. You're not going to stop plastic use and plastic pollution on the end if we don't grab people's awareness and really shake them up and say, look, there is no planet B. Okay. So that's it. This is it. We're living here. We already have water scarcity and polluted sources of water that affect so many areas in the world with the very lack of water we have. So we can't keep having things like microplastics and toxins end up in our water supply, in the air, or in any of the food stuff that we consume. We've got to know that it's only going to be helped, this entire situation, if we really do get rid of that daily use of extremely large amounts of plastic and then continue on and help throughout at the very end, especially with the cleanups. That can't stop. We must have cleanups still. But we can also start in our house.
That's actually very motivating, Jenny. Honestly, before I started, and I think for most of our listeners, it's the same, right? It's very hard for us to think of a life without plastics. But, baby steps, as you said, speaking with you has actually made me believe that, there is a way to decrease our exposure. It may not be possible to eliminate it today, as you mentioned, right? But let's at least move towards decreasing it. So while I, love to discuss further on this, I realize we've run out of time. And I'm so glad you could join us today. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I really, really appreciate you taking out the time for this.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Parth and Moving Water Alliance, for having me on your podcast, and to our listeners. So I really appreciate having this opportunity to discuss plastic usage and reduction.
It's a very valuable message, Jenny. And to all of our listeners, if you like hearing about environmental issues, beach cleanups, river cleanups,